Hello fellow cinephiles, Film Guru here. Today I'm reviewing a classic sci-fi film from 1956, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. This was directed by Don Siegel and stars Kevin McCarthy, Dana Wyatt and a variety of others. The film really looks at Dr. Miles Bennell, played by Kevin McCarthy, a small town doctor. When we first meet him, he begins to tell a story of something that happened to him. He seems a bit crazy and disturbed, and you're not quite sure what's going on. And he's at a particular hospital where a psychiatrist asks him to tell his story, so he begins to tell his story. And what follows is we see him return home to his small California town of Santa Maria from a medical convention at the behest of his nurse, because a variety of people in the town have come to see him, but he's not there. And when he returns, they don't want to see him at all, like something's changed. They don't seem like they're the people they were before. On his return, he ultimately is confronted by strange reports from several of the patients who insist that their seemingly banal relatives are in fact imposters. After some initial skepticism, Miles is convinced when, during a barbecue with some friends, he discovers two huge seed pods that burst open to release a bubbly fluid and two incomplete human replicas, one of which is well on its way to looking like him himself. Speculating that a bizarre alien invasion is underway, Miles and his love interest Becky, played by Dana Wyatt, attempt to get away as the entire town falls sway to the pod's dehumanizing effects. This is classic sci-fi at its best. This is a film I've really loved. I've liked the incarnations of these movies as well. There's been a variety through the years. There's one in the 70s, 90s and noughties. And I really like the concept and ideas within the Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's something I've really latched to and enjoyed for a number of years. I've even gone as far as reading the book that this film is based on by Jack Finny. And I really enjoyed that as well. It's a different interpretation. And this film does something completely different to all the other sci-fi films of the Golden Age. It doesn't really focus on some sort of weird creature or deformed figure that's trying to attack people or has claws or whatever like that. It's more a psychological thriller in that regard. It's simple and stripped back bare. It's basic. It's more a suspense thriller-based film. We don't see a lot of creatures or anything. The only effects that we do see are pods themselves and the people coming out of the pods. And the rest is all more psychological, and it's very effective in that regard. This had social commentary in it. It was talking about communism, it was talking about the Cold War, and a variety of things were happening in the 50s. And it sort of focuses on that in the smallest of ways. The idea that threats can come from outside and within. And it looks at the fear and people had with regards to what was happening at the time. And I think this is an effective way to do sort of a sci-fi or a horror film, to have a social commentary on it rather than the run-of-the-mill type thing. What I really love about Don Siegel movies is the minimalist. He's a minimal director. He doesn't do anything extravagant. It's always simple and basic and effective stories. He was really one of the early independent filmmakers, I think, because his movies are always simple, but they had a good, solid story. He wasn't big on effects, he wasn't big on explosions or making a huge film. It was small and intimate. And that's the type of movies he made. And this is a great example of that. He's a director that really inspired Clint Eastwood to make films and really guided him as Eastwood started to make movies in the early days. He's just a very effective director, and I like what he's done here. This film is very simple, basic, to the point. It's small in its size. It takes place in one town and it's very effectively done. It's not a long film. It only goes for like an hour and 20 minutes. But it says everything it needs to say. And what's really great about it is when we're listening to Miles Bennell telling his story, we don't really know if what he's telling us is true. This is all through his memory of things, or he's telling this story. But as the film goes along, and as we get to the end of the film, we start to question his sanity and realize maybe he isn't as crazy as he seems. And I thought that was really clever and a really great way to do it. I like that it started sort of towards the end of the film and it had him telling his story, so he could introduce a voiceover without just randomly throwing it in. And he could tell his story as the film unfolded. That I really like. I like the simplicity of how you start to question things. Like you have all these people saying that the person they know is an imposter, but they can't prove it. They just know that that person isn't their uncle or isn't their son or isn't their mother. It just like they just have a feeling of it. But then they start to accept it, and then you have to question what's going on. And the horror elements or the thriller sci-fi elements aren't sort of revealed until a bit later in the film. And they're done in a simple way where they find ultimately the doctor ends up at his friend's house and they've found this body. It's been in the cupboard, and it isn't completely formed, and it doesn't have any fingerprints, and it sort of starts to wonder who this body is. And there's this great sequence where the husband and wife who found this body start to fall asleep, and then the body slowly forms into the man and opens its eyes, and it's shot. Imposter changing into the man is shot in the foreground with them asleep in the background. It's just very effectively done. And you start to see how everyone's affected by this, but you're not quite sure why or how. And it's really about how Miles is trying to get him and Becky out of the town and what it actually costs him to do that. And how he comes up against so many things, and how they keep trying to make them become, like them, pod people who have no emotion, who have no feeling. And there's this talk in it about love. They've sort of captured them. And Miles says to them that, I love Becky. And he goes, well, I still feel that after all this happens, after I become this pod person. And they said, no, you don't need to have emotions like that or anything. And that sort of upsets him, and it upsets Becky as well. And it's kind of interesting how it's saying you won't feel any of the things, but this life is better, but they can't accept that and they struggle with it. And I kind of like that. It's beautifully shot in black and white. There's some great effective visual effects that are used, some simple, process and a variety of other things. And I like the design of the pods, the seed pods themselves, and what the humanoid bodies look like when they come out of them. I really like that as well. I think it's a very effective and entertaining movie. It's engaging. You really feel for the main character and his plight, and you want to see him succeed and get through it and survive the town. I think it has one of the best sci-fi endings in that it's not complete. It doesn't say this is the end. It's like this movie was just the beginning, and other things will unfold as the film ends and the story continues. This film felt like a pilot episode to a TV show. Like, you're introduced to the character, introduced to the circumstances, and it ends in a way that you could see more happening. And I think Invasion of the Body Snatchers would serve really well as a TV series. Take your time to tell the story, expand on it, start with this event happening, and have, rebellious people, have groups of people fighting against these people and trying to stay awake. I just think that would be really interesting. And I would love to see that, because I think these sort of Invasion of the Body Snatchers is really simple and very effectively done. There's things that they touch upon to explain things, but they don't really go into depth about it. And I felt that they should have, or they could have. One of the things is they say that these sort of seeds have been floating around the universe for many years, and then they end up in this farmer's patch, and then they sort of grow, and then the pods come from that. But I would like to know more about it. They've never really got into it, divulged that information. A little bit more in the noughties version of it, called Invasion. But they just sort of touched on it, and I would have liked to know more about it. And I would have liked to know more about how, once the pod people take over, what happened to the real person, the human? Like, where do they go? Do they just disintegrate? Do they die? What sort of happens? And they only sort of touched on that and really didn't really get into it. And I would like to know more about that as well. But besides that, I really loved the film. I thought it was so well done. It really suits that golden age of science fiction in the 50s and the 60s. And I really like what it's trying to say. I like the social commentary to it. I think Don Siegel did a solid job as director. And the performances are solid for that era and for the type of story this film is conveying. Final thoughts. At the heart of it, it's really about people's fears. It's really about fearing of complacency, a fear of becoming part of the masses and not being an individual anymore. And the fear of not having emotions or getting rid of emotions and not feeling human anymore. I just think this is one of the best sci-fis to come out of 1956 and sci-fi in general, and I'm a huge fan of it. I'm going to give Invasion of the Body Snatchers 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed my experience with it. I've always enjoyed this film and the story and this storyline. And I really like the visuals and the minimalistic directing by Don Siegel and the effectiveness of using the camera to tell the story. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit subscribe down the bottom. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.